Wonderful. Thank you, Will. And hello, everybody. For so many of you so far, this is absolutely fantastic. I love seeing how many people have been inside of here and how many of you have been engaging with me over on social media as well. I feel like every day a new person's reaching out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn or something else. And it's just so phenomenal to see such an amazing cohort, so lively and so engaging with everything. So this has been absolutely fantastic. Let me actually start by sharing my screen and making sure that all of you can actually see it with the super cliche stuff. If you can see my screen, folks, can you just give me a thumbs up or a yes or no? Awesome. Fantastic. Fantastic. And I was checking on the chat just to make sure. All right. Cool. Well, let us do this. And let me actually start this timer here. Perfect. So for those of you who don't know me, by the way, even though I know I've talked to so many of you so far, my name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I am a senior instructional designer and program manager over here at MIT. I also produce a lot of content on the internet all about instructional design, a blog, podcast, YouTube channel, and all this other different stuff. And on top of that, I also recently wrote a book called What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer. So it's safe to say that I love instructional design. I love this field. I love talking about it. It absolutely fills me with so much joy to see right now, as I am talking with you, there are 62 of you who are currently in this webinar to learn more about my favorite instructional design model. So this is going to be awesome to go through the next hour or so, working together, learning from one another, and I cannot wait to dive on in. So I'm really curious, before you came over into EduFlow Academy, have you heard of backward design before? Go in the chat real quick. Give me a yes or give me a no. Some no's, some yeses, some yeps. Getting a mix of everything. Use it every day. Okay. So we have some pros and we have some people who have not heard about this before, and that's fantastic. So the thing is with backward design, and I'm definitely going to get into this quite a bit today, but what I really love about this entire instructional design model is that we are starting first with the goals in mind. And that to me is something that certainly resonates with me as an educator and as somebody who also failed out of high school, because I never saw the connection of the real world and how this was actually going to help me as I was progressing through high school and through everything else. I never really saw it. And the thing is that if I was included in the goals, if I was able to monitor my own progress, if I was able to see and actually evaluate how I was learning in real time, I would have been far more successful. And this is the thing when it comes to designing online learning experiences, is that I want you to know all the ins and outs and everything with this model and how this all truly works. So let me click on this button to share with you the agenda of what I would love to go through today, because I know that we only have an hour. I will say that I do not have a meeting after this, so I am more than happy to stick around after this session. If you have any other questions or anything else I can help out with, feel free to let me know. But this is the plan. We're going to go through an overview of backward design, talking about the 3 steps of everything for this model. You are also going to be going in and diving on in, talking more about revising learning outcomes. There was also an activity that we asked you to practice before coming in today, which gave you a type of scenario, which I'm going to dive into a little bit more, and talking all about how do you actually revise those learning objectives and what would you do. You're going to go into breakout rooms and share with them your ideas about what you had for that activity. We're also going to be talking about how to actually create meaningful and engaging assessments. When you think about assessments, a lot of people just think about essays and quizzes, and there's so much more to that to make the online learning experience absolutely awesome. So we're going to dive on it further in there, go into a breakout room, and then finally talk about the overall learning experience, and then kicking around for any Q&A types of sessions. So first and foremost, why backward design? Why exactly should we be going through this model? Because there are so many different types of instructional design models that I know that many of you have already gone through so far, especially with all the content that William has developed and put inside of this course. There are so many different kinds of ways to design these types of trainings or programs or courses or whatever it is. And what I want you to think about in backward design is really 3 different perspectives that I have seen and I have heard over the years as being an instructor, an instructional designer, as well as being a student as well. From the instructor's perspective, what is so important to them is being able to properly evaluate how students are just doing within the course itself, and where and how are we actually going to provide support. And this really goes into as well to the instructional design perspective about everything, because we, as the entire people who are developing this type of online learning experience, well, we want to know, how do we improve this? How do we make this better? How do we revise this over time? And what exactly hit home and connected with students and learners, and perhaps maybe what really didn't go so well, and what can we do better the next time. And then finally is the student's perspective, the most important perspective, I would argue, because for them, they need to be able to see their own growth. We know from research the power and the significance of having a growth mindset. And how does this really all come into play? Well, it's the fact that you can actually see in real time how you are doing, evaluate your progress, and then determine if you are going down the right track, or if you need to do something differently, if you need more support, or for anything else. So these are the perspectives of why I love backward design in particular. Now, from this model, there are overall three main steps. The first is to be able to think about, well, what are our goals? What do we want learners and students to actually be able to walk away with at the end of the day once they have gone through our training, our course, or whatever we are developing? And these are essentially the course outcomes. You might call them learning outcomes or something different. There are certainly lots of interchangeable terms here, but overall, just think about outcomes at the end of the day. Next, we need to think about exactly how are we determining whether or not somebody is actually properly progressing. We are looking for that evidence that says, yes, this person is on track, or no, they're not there yet. They need a little bit more support. And that comes with developing assessments. And then finally comes the overall designing of a learning experience, which is what a lot of people think about first, actually, when they're designing something. They think about the readings or a book or the videos or whatever else. And we're taking this concept and we're doing it literally backwards by starting with the goals first. So first and foremost, need to talk about Bloom's taxonomy. Once again, I want to go in the chat here. How many of you have heard of Bloom's taxonomy before? Give me a yes, give me a no. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. That's what I kind of figured. So many people know about this, especially too for a lot of you who are aspiring instructional designers, current instructional designers, anything else. You are always going to see Bloom's taxonomy either on a job posting, a conversation, or something else of the sort. What a lot of people don't know about is that Bloom's taxonomy actually comes from Benjamin Bloom, an educator back from 1956. And what this was essentially saying, what his research really did show, is that there has to be some way for us to determine exactly how learning is taking place, and trying to be able to find a better way to align everything at the end of the day. Now, in 2001, a group of educators, psychologists, and researchers got together and actually revised the taxonomy a little bit there. So when you actually Google it, you're going to see two different types of perspectives. But overall, the same meaning does apply, in that we're essentially just trying to talk about learning and being able to align this to be certain types of objectives. Now, what I want you to know about as well too for Bloom's taxonomy is that this is certainly not a type of a linear progress, which somehow this has come up before at some point in time and still kind of carries on to this day, is that because it's in the shape of a pyramid, we therefore must constantly keep on going and accelerating up. And unfortunately, like making this type of angle. And while I understand why people are talking about it like that way, there's also plenty of points in time where you're going to be talking about different types of skill sets that are going to overlap and they're going to mix together. So that's not always the case. There's going to be nuances and differences and things of this sort. But overall, from going through this, and I'm not going to take much time here since literally almost everyone knows about this, but we are just trying to be able, when we are creating outcomes and learning objectives, of trying to be able to properly figure out the right action of what we are really trying to look for here. So this could be something like recalling facts. It could be talking about explaining an idea or describing it. It could be talking about how do you actually implement an idea and apply what you are learning. Or maybe it's something like comparing and contrasting and analyzing a situation, or being able to actually defend your reasoning for why you are thinking one way versus another. And then, of course, it being able to actually design, assemble, and to construct overall new knowledge. So what are some examples here? Because I want to give you a couple of different examples from the real world. And these are three actually taken from some of my courses over at MIT. And as you are seeing, they are very simple. They're straightforward. They're to the point. There's not a lot of fluff or academic jargon here. I really just want it to be that if a learner goes into the course, reads the syllabus, and sees this, they're like, oh, okay, that's what it is. At the end of a course, I'm going to be able to figure out this, this, and this. And that's how these are really created. So if we start from the first example here, this is a course that was all about leadership and with culture. And all that I wanted them to do by the end for this outcome in particular is that I wanted them to be able to identify different types of subcultures within their place of work. And a subculture is essentially a culture within a culture. So by the time the course was done, I wanted them to go to their job site and actually see different departments and say, oh, that is the kind of culture that this engineering group has compared to the culture of over here with sales, where they have their own culture, and how exactly do these mix and match. There's also a course that was on leadership and networking. And for this one, simply, I just want them to be able to describe the fundamentals of a network and how do you use a network effectively. And then finally, there was one that was talking all about innovation and invention. And for this one, they were going through all of the motions when it comes to agile and lean. So this was talking about how I wanted them to actually be able to go and apply these learnings. I wanted you to apply the methodology to a new idea. What would you do as far as executing, prototyping, design, and everything else? So that is how these all come into play. Simple, clear, and concise is how I like to be able to describe my learning outcomes. Now, there are a few common mistakes when it comes to learning outcomes and objectives. And I was actually reading some of your submissions from the activity that we asked you to do beforehand. And I actually saw some of these. So I'm really glad because I can bring them up as well, because they are very, very common within the world of what it is that we do. And especially if you are if you are a designer and you are working with somebody like a faculty member or a subject matter expert, who we call SMEs, by the way. If you hear me say the word SMEs, it does mean subject matter expert. You are working with somebody, and typically what happens to me is that someone wants to take their face-to-face version of a course and they want to flip it and they want to make it online. So we start first of like, okay, great. Like what goals do you have? What have you currently done so far? What are the students doing? And usually we go through the syllabus together. And then that is when I will usually see these different types of mistakes that do pop up. One of them is using the term understand. Now, this is what's kind of funny is because I understand why they're saying the word understand. But when it comes to being able to assess knowledge, when it comes to being able to allow students to really know and learners to know why they're going through something and what exactly they're being graded upon, well, understand, that's kind of vague. Something that I think I understand versus what you might understand could be entirely different. And we can break this down a little bit more. So instead of saying understand, are you trying to have me to describe an item? Are you trying to have me to identify something? Do you want me to go and apply this? What do you want me to exactly do? And not just say the words understand. The other thing that we always are going to keep on seeing is that everyone tries to just kind of cram in as many verbs as possible into one outcome. By the end of a course, you're going to be able to describe, analyze, evaluate, implement, and do everything else under the sun in these short couple of weeks. And you're like, wait, no, we can't. Like, how are you properly evaluating my learning and what I'm doing if you're trying to ask me to do 10 different things at the same time? It just doesn't make sense. So we need to define this a bit further. And then finally, is creating too many learning outcomes. If you have something that is going to be an 8-week course or 10-week or a workshop or whatever it is, I have seen some that just go on for forever. And I just don't understand. There's so many different types of outcomes in such a little amount of time. It's just not feasible. I was actually talking with a friend of mine who was a trainer for a local police academy over here. And one of the things that he was showing me is that there was almost 40 learning outcomes in like a 1-hour workshop. I'm like, no, what do you know? We can't. It's just not feasibly possible. So for anything, whether it's going to be a 4-week course, 8-week, 16-week, whatever it is, I try to keep it simple. I try to do anywhere between 4 to 7 outcomes because that's the sweet spot to me. That's what research has shown for us to do, is to also try to get into that type of range. And that's going to be our best bet to succeed. Now, let's talk a little bit about what you went through so far within EduFlow Academy and the actual learning objectives. So there was a scenario that was taking place. I was talking all about nutrition, and we actually got some feedback from some of you on this scenario. So thank you, because that's how we're going to make things better is, of course, hearing from your feedback and what we could do to try to make it better the next time. There was something that actually took place, putting the scenario aside. There was something that took place that actually kind of made me think about these learning objectives from a nutrition standpoint, because one university that I did work at, they created a brand new health and wellness center. And this was something that we never had before. And we started to survey the employees and just simply ask about our performance, how we're feeling, and how do we actually perceive nutrition? Because a lot of people simply are like, I don't know, I think I could be a lot better. So all of these different surveys started to come about. And eventually, these new types of online courses and trainings came about as far as for creating recipes, different ideas, talking about how to actually increase activity, and all these other different things too. So that is what, in my mind, I was thinking about with these different types of learning objectives, because this was actually somewhat similar to what we were seeing, is that they really weren't that great. They were getting there. And the person who was making them had the best, most knowledge and training that they had at the time, but there wasn't an instructional designer on the team to really try to help and flush things out. So these were the different types of objectives that we saw, where they said at the end of a course, students should be able to understand the difference between healthy foods and junk foods. Upon completing the course, students are going to be able to share, describe, and create a healthy recipe. And then finally, at the end of everything, students are going to be able to understand proper eating habits that will lead to a healthy lifestyle while making the correct choices on what to eat versus what not to eat. So what I'd love for us to do now, because I would love to stop talking as I've been talking now for at least 16 minutes, I would love to put you now into different breakout rooms, share different types of learning objectives and outcomes that you have thought about, what you revised from those different types of bullet points that you just saw, and then share what you actually thought about and what you made better. And then when we come back, I would love for some of you to be able to go and just say a little bit more about what you did. And because there's 130 of you, not going to get to everybody, obviously, but I'd love for a couple of people just to share what they found. William, sir, if you could please put people into the breakout rooms. Oh, Laura, I love your question, by the way. I didn't see that in the chat, and I just did. How do we actually think about that when it comes to realize what does somebody need to do? That is fantastic, because it's like, how do you capture that epiphany moment where they actually have realized something and the light bulb moment actually goes off inside of somebody's head? That would be very, very clever if we were able to try to go and figure out something that was based around an activity or an assessment that would try to be able to showcase that. That would be the next thing of how I would try to answer that, would be to dive on in to see how I would be able to trace that. So that is a fantastic question. And Jason says, I love the light bulb moment. It's the best part of teaching. It is. When someone actually has that light bulb moment inside of their head, it's fantastic. Hand raise. Zoli, is that how I see your name? Go for it.
Yeah,
yours. Yes.
Yeah, because I was the one coming up with the realized.
Yes. Yeah, go on.
I did think about already how to measure it, and I was thinking to do some kind of in EduFlow, because we are using EduFlow for young company. We do actually use this activity. Which is, when you have to like drag and drop words into, a basket and sort of. So like I thought about something similar. So like kind of the, there are effects, there are mental effects, and then does it go into the healthy food or the unhealthy food diet? So something similar, we would be able to check if they actually do understand now. I don't know, being energized means healthy food, and then vice versa, eating at least half of your plate being veggies a day is healthy, and then McDonald's is unhealthy. So like something, I'm just for the sake of the example.
Just spitballing there, but it's a great one. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that word is so interesting. It doesn't come up that much either. I'm thinking of all the words in Bloom, so people use different verbs, and realize isn't one of the common ones. But in your situation, for what you were talking about, I can definitely get how that would be appropriate. So Fun activity. Great points. I love this conversation. I was going to ask folks about like being able to share what they were just doing, but we just had a fantastic example of mentioning about how instead of the word understand, we were talking about the word realize. And that was definitely really, really interesting just to ponder on here. I want to, of course, be mindful of all of our times though. So I am now going to kind of skip ahead because we got a few more things that I would love for us to be able to cover. And we only have so much time. I wish we had more. More people are actually raising their hands. Oh, goodness. Unless if you have, oh, this is a conversation happening. Never mind. I love the conversations are happening behind the scenes, by the way. And I saw that like there's 40 something comments going back and forth. It's just absolutely wonderful to see. So let's keep this show on the road and keep on going. So now, we have outcomes, we have objectives, we have been talking about this, and now it is time to talk about determining that acceptable level of evidence. And this is going to come from assessments. Now, when we think of assessments, what I was saying before is that so many people think about assessments as quizzes and essays. Now, don't get me wrong, they have their place in time when it comes to being able to assess knowledge, but at the same time, there is so much more that we can actually do. But we want to be able to actually just backpedal a little bit here and just think about it. And why? Why do we make students do assignments and exercises? Why do we make them go through this in the first place? And that's something that you really need to think about, because so many times when it comes to a training or a workshop or a program, course, or whatever it is, it's like a natural thing that people are like, oh, we need to put a quiz here. And then no one stops to say like, well, why? Is that the appropriate amount of time there? Do we know properly why we are quizzing them? Or is there going to be feedback on the quiz? Is it just going to leave them with a blank yes or no answer? And maybe they got it right and maybe they got it wrong and nobody tells them. What exactly, how are we actually doing this? So first and foremost, think about the purpose of the assessment as you were going through this instructional design journey with all of us today. And the purpose of assessments, in my opinion, is that we want our students and our learners to be able to demonstrate about what they've learned. We actually want to be able to see it. We want to be able to make sure that what they are going through and what they have done also links to everything as far as for a clarity and transparency purpose of, do the learners and the students know why they are being asked to do the thing? There are so many times of on-the-job training that somebody is just like, hey, I want you to go and do this from your supervisor or colleague, whatever. And usually the next question is like, oh, okay, well, why am I doing this? Is it benefiting me, the organization? Is it helpful to students? Like, why am I doing this? There's very few times that in the real world nowadays that somebody can give you a command and you're like, got it, I'll go do the thing. That really doesn't happen so much anymore. And in the classroom, it is certainly something that is the same thing. We need to be able to make sure that they know the purpose behind the why of why they're actually doing this. And then, of course, making sure that everything that we do aligns back to the outcomes. So it's clear. It is clear to them that here is the end goal. This is the assessment that's going to help me to get there, and so on and so forth. So let's talk more about assessments. Beyond quizzes and essays, what do we have? Well, quite a bit, honestly. These are a few that kind of came to the top of my mind. Is that one, to make people actually work in groups and in teams, where they're calling it group work or team-based learning because of the fact that we actually have to work with others in the real world on our jobs, which is a very normal thing. Want someone to actually be able to know how to do this. Doing presentations and stand-ups and making sure that they can actually defend and talk about what it is that they are trying to go through with their concept, the idea, or so on and so forth. Having capstones, wanting them to work their way through a project to go from one point in time all the way until the end. Also having peer-reviewed assignments and activities. You've gone through many of them with EduFlow so far as you being able to submit your activity, and then in turn, you're going to be getting one from your fellow peer, and you're giving them feedback and guidance along the way. And you can do this even more when it comes to grading and rubrics and everything else as well. Having case studies, actually having real-world examples about, I'm trying to solve this problem, I'm trying to make this decision. What has someone actually done in the real world when they were facing this exact same crisis? Oh, let me read the research on it and go through the motions myself to see, do I arrive at the same type of conclusion? And then, of course, scenario-based assignments, where we're asking students to put themselves into a hypothetical scenario. And what would they do if they were in the character's shoes? Actually doing a project-based, or even simulations or everything else, as constantly I feel like my feed is just 24/7 all about XR and the metaverse, because you know what? It's coming soon, and we need to know about how we're actually going to design assessments inside of there. So let me give you a couple of different examples of what I have done. When it comes to scenario-based learning, this was one of the types of learning theories and techniques that I have used that has been so interesting and fascinating to see. Because for a lot of the times, a lot of people ask me about like how many authoring tools do I use and things of that nature. And if I'm being honest, honestly, not many. I use a lot of things within my learning management system itself and just using what I have for research and creativity and putting things together. And scenario-based learning is one of those. So I was developing a critical thinking course on leadership right before the pandemic hit. And I was reading more and more about research, and I'm seeing what different types of organizations were doing. And I'm realizing I was like, we're not getting out of this anytime soon. We're going to have to change a lot of what it is that we do within an organization. And this started to make me think more about business models, because different types of organizations were trying to flip their business model into something different because they had never done home deliveries before, or doing something like using a streaming service to launch a new movie instead of going into the theaters, or having a membership access to something, and many other different things. So I actually created a scenario that was based all around Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola's main revenue comes from live events. There's no live events. What are they going to do? I posed that to my students and asked them from a leadership perspective, if you were going to be a leader working in the R&D lab, what would you do? Whatever different types of business models could actually be effective for Coca-Cola, and how exactly would you flip this? Come to find out, all of a sudden, Coca-Cola goes remote, and now, sure enough, their team was indeed trying to figure out how to do this, and there are some research articles that talked about that, which is so fascinating to see. And then I asked them to be able to go and submit this, and then to get different types of feedback from other people, and made this into a peer-reviewed activity. And for doing different types of exit interviews with my students, they were all asking about like, well, how did I know this was coming down the pike? How did I know it's going to be a thing? It's like, well, we do research. We want to be able to try to actually make a real scenario for you to follow, and not some hypothetical thing like ABZ123 company is doing a blah. It's like, no, I want you to actually think about this from a real world perspective. So once you're done and moving on into your journey, how this is actually going to connect and hit home with you. For another one, we used something for a leadership program that was all around a simulation that was called the Change Management Simulation. Now, this comes out of Harvard Business Publishing. And by all means, if you are in a business school, or if you work for a business or anything like-minded, please go and look at Harvard Business Publishing simulations. They're absolutely fantastic. And we use one of these for the entire leadership program. Now, the basis of this is that you are an up-and-coming leader, and you are trying to lead a new change within an organization, but you hold zero power. Nothing. You are on the bottom of the hierarchy. Nobody listens to you. Well, what do you do? And this is what we wanted to do with the simulation. Instead of going into the real world first and trying and winging it and hoping that something actually works, this simulation was a good first step to allow students to practice in a safe space, fail here instead of failing in the real world. Now, this is what was so fascinating. If you look at your screen, is that you're going to see a different type of hierarchy of a bunch of different people. And there were so many weeks to execute some new type of action plan. And this is what students had to do. They had to pick and choose who in the organization they were going to talk to, and what were they going to try to convince them of? Are they going to actually host a town hall meeting? Are they going to send an email? Are they going to make a new mentorship program? What are they going to do to get the buy-in of this person to help them with carrying on this new idea until eventually it passes and reaches all the way up until the top? Now, just like in the real world as well, you could step on toes and get people really aggravated and they're not going to listen to you in the future. So it had this type of a real world implication that people absolutely loved. And we asked them to write an essay all about more of just their strategies and what worked and what didn't work. But what ended up happening, which is so interesting from the organic type of explosion of this, is that people loved it so much. They were going into the discussion board and they were talking about it. They were bragging about their scores to their fellow peers, of saying like, I was able to get everyone in this organization to adopt my idea, and it only took me like 14 weeks out of a 96. And they were comparing notes and going through things. And of course, this is all backed by research. So not only did they get the immediate feedback of just like, look, this person is not listening to you anymore, they could also understand why and how this potentially bothers somebody, and what could you do the next time to try to over encounter these different types of barriers. So those folks, those are a few things that I just wanted to share with you quickly about different types of assessments. And what I would love for you to do right now is to think about all those different forms of types of assessments we talked about, whether from group work or project-based learning or scenarios or simulations or whatever you want to be able to think about. And I want you to go back into your breakout rooms, think about those different types of outcomes that you had for those different forms of the nutrition, learning objectives, the learning outcomes. And what could you do? What assessment would actually feed into you trying to be able to achieve that outcome? William, sir, would you please send folks into their groups?
Cool. There's a little change. This time you're going to go immediately. You don't have to click to join. Just a reminder, if you are in a room with nobody, you can just come back to the main room and then
come on back. We'll be here. Yeah.
I'm going to make the groups a bit bigger this time, and recreate, and I'll see you all later.
William, that was the first time ever that I was put into the breakout room, which is a lot of fun to chat with my group. That was actually a ton of fun and a nice surprise to go through things. Yeah. Before I start blabbering on away, I just had to reshare everything for my screen. Can everyone see stuff again? Thumbs up, word. Okay, awesome. Just wanted to make sure about that one. So wonderful. Well, I was going to ask for a couple of examples, but I just heard 4 awesome examples of my own. And I'm sure that many of you have also shared some incredible things. And we only have a couple of minutes left. So I want to make sure to go through the final things I wanted to share with you. And then I want to be respectful of your time. So we'll of course end on time, but I will absolutely stick around. If you have any other questions at the end of this, I'm not going anywhere. So please feel free to ask and to share away. Just want to check the chat real quick that, okay, everyone's just talking about everything and stuff. Fantastic. All right, let's crush that. Okay, so finally, folks, just to wrap this all up and put a bow on everything, is that we have already gone through step 1, talking about the outcomes. We just talked about step 2 when it came to developing assessments. And then finally, for step 3, is now designing the rest of the learning experience, which is going to be building the content. Now, a lot of folks, when they think about this, they actually approach it from like a forward design thinking standpoint, where they think about the context first. They actually go out and buy the textbook, and then they build the actual learning experience around the textbook, where in this case, we're talking about the opposite. Now, things are coming at the end. So now we're going to be talking more about the readings and the videos and other different types of learning activities as well, too. Now, when I'm saying learning activities, I am specifically talking about ungraded activities. And that's important to note, because why I say that is that I want people to be able to practice in a safe space and not feel like they are actually being harshly graded. Because then when they go and be evaluated later on, now that they have made mistakes and they've gone through different things and whatnot, well, then now it makes sense to actually go and evaluate what's going on. But for here, we're just talking about more along the lines of ungraded activities. So this is a breakdown of a couple of different learning activities that we have all probably seen and used at some point in time in a course or a training or workshop or whatever it is. So let me go through a couple of them. So one is obviously discussion boards. You all know them. You've all been inside of them. If the learning platform itself has a great discussion board, like as far as where does it actually function correctly, then life is good. EduFlow does. The platform is great. This is why I'm also a part of this, everything too with this program itself. And the discussion boards actually function and work the way that I want them to. I've used some learning management systems before where they're not so awesome, and that kind of can be a bit of a problem. But those are definitely one options to do. Next comes reflection questions. At some point in time, when someone is going through everything with the learning process, you need to be able to stop, to pause, and to think, what did I just learn about? How is this going to help me? How can I actually take what I have learned about from applying the prior knowledge that I've already gone through in the other weeks and then combining it to what I just learned about? This reflection piece is huge to making everything stick that you are learning about, and that needs to be included at the end of the module or the week or whatever is appropriate for whatever you are designing for. Then you're going to see things like with multiple choice questions, matching, drag and drop. I'm going to assume that all of you know what those are because we've all gone through them in some capacity. Also want to talk about polls, though. When I'm saying polls, I mean that students and learners love to be able to vote on different ideas and then to see what the results are. It's something that I really didn't experience so much until MIT, and then I realized that by putting them at the end, kind of curious to see how people would do, and people love them. And I was like, interesting. I guess I'll use those more. So I'll talk about those in a little bit. Journal entries, if somebody is actually documenting what they are currently going through as they are progressing through the entire learning process from week to week and week, and they don't have to share that. It's just them journaling down what they are going through. That's going to absolutely help them to retain the information for going forwards. And then finally, practice questions. As I keep on hitting home, practicing in a safe space with something that relates to your life or the journey or the academic career or whatever it is definitely going to help folks out. Now let's talk about polls. So in some of the courses that I have, they are going to obviously have readings and videos. And in this example, we had one video that talked all about networking. So going back to that course outcome about networking. And inside of here, the professor concluded the video by then posing to the students a question where he wanted to know, in this entire scenario, who has the better network? Is it Bob or is it Jim? And you can currently see on the screen two different names of Bob and Jim, and you can see how the different types of networks aligned. And then at the end of the video, though, we then put the poll at the bottom of just like, well, hey, who is the better network, Bob and Jim? And it was crazy because everyone in the class of the hundreds of people actually voted on who had the better network. But on top of that, then another discussion began to emerge because some people felt very strongly that Bob had the better network, and other people were fighting passionately saying, no, I want to be Jim. Jim has the better network. And that was just kind of so funny to me to actually see people relate to these hypothetical characters and to vote so strongly on them. Now, in that same course, afterwards with everything, I then wanted them to think more about their own lives and have them do a type of a practice activity. And in this case, the practice activity was talking about structural holes. And what structural holes are is that when you think about a network, where is there actually a missing piece where one person of this network and the other person of a network or the group, they're not connecting. And you can actually be the bridge to the gap with everything and to make sure that these two parties come together. And this is one way for you to be able to increase your networking power at your organization. So what I asked students to do was really take out a piece of paper, draw your network, and then from here, figure out where are the holes. How can you actually serve to be that bridge for that gap and to make everything connect? It wasn't submitted. It was just for them to do and then to use at the end of everything. Now for discussions, some of you may have seen me share this on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or whatever if you've been following me. I am obsessed with GatherTown, and I still am, and I always will be, because this to me is so cool, and it's made our discussions come so alive because I know we're using Zoom because it has breakout rooms, and there was like a lot of people who started this entire conversation with already. And for GatherTown, that would have been a lot to handle, but so we're using Zoom. But I will say, for your types of courses or trainings or whatever it is that you're doing, GatherTown is essentially, imagine if like an old school Super Nintendo game of The Legend of Zelda and Zoom came together to make something. That's what GatherTown is. It's this type of a old school bit graphic way to be able to connect with other people, but it still has everything as far as for sounds and for background noises. And in this case, for one of our courses, we concluded with a fireside chat. And of course, it had the sound of a roaring fire, but it's all based around proximity. So as you move closer to people, the videos are actually going to enlarge in. And then as you pull away, that's when everything goes black, basically like in the real world of a conference. Is that as you get closer to somebody, you can obviously hear them. And then when you want to step away, the same thing actually happens where then everything goes into the next conversation and whatnot. Absolutely insane to use. It's free to use for up to 25 people. And I love it. Now I'll keep on talking about it because it is just so cool to see. So of course, in the classroom conversation, it just made things so much more different and enjoyable. And people who have been so tired about getting burned out by Zoom, it was just a refresher to be able to use something brand new and to help folks to be more engaged with everything for the conversation. And then last but not least, and I'll be very quick, is content. When we think about content for a lot of courses, they think about textbooks, but there's honestly so much more. Yes, books are important, and don't get me wrong, but we can use articles and ebooks and audio files and podcasts and webinars and videos and all these other different amazing things that we want to be able to actually meet the learners where they are. How do they consume content on a normal behavior? Whatever they are doing in the real world, I want to be able to match that as well. So that's how I include all these different things in my courses that I design and that I teach. And for one of the courses that I teach is all about marketing. And I realized from talking with all of the students is that for many of them, they came into the course on marketing because they actually wanted to be a marketer for an organization. But half of the students, though, they wanted to be someone who is an entrepreneur. That was the goal. And they're like, I need to know about marketing. I don't know anything. And I'm sitting here looking at the content. The content is definitely tailored for like an organization. I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do? So quickly, I made a pivot and I found a podcast episode every single week from an entrepreneur that aligned what I was teaching about for the week with the podcast content. And I shared that in all my announcements every single week. And people 1000% were so overjoyed and loved it because of the fact that it spoke to them. It spoke to the entrepreneur and not just from the organizational level. And then finally, I've also made my own podcast before from realizing that for some of my students, they want to be able to connect with the course material, but they don't have enough time to be able to do so. I kept on doing exit interviews with students and hearing about this. And then finally, I was just like, so where do you have the time? And a lot of people are like, well, I have time in my commute. Could you do something there? It's like, yes, I could. I can make a podcast. So sure enough, we actually tried it. And another thing too is a huge hit that a lot of people enjoyed it because it was essentially the interviews from the faculty members. And I came in as the narrator, weaving together this story about the course content. And it really was a massive success as far as for being able to see when students were upset that I wasn't making new episodes. That's how I knew that something was going on the right track. They were talking about on the discussion boards of like, when's the next episode? Like, I don't have any, like, sorry. So that exists. And you can actually, if you want to be able to see an example of this, you can go into Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever, and you can type in my name and it will pop up. So you can hear an example of what this actually does sound like. So then finally, folks, just to put this all together, this is a visual about what I think about when I'm taking everything from the outcomes, the assessments, activities, content, everything else. What does it look like? Well, this is what I do. I put together 4 columns where I put the outcome on the left-hand side. I then put the assessment, the learning activity, and then the content. And this is where I can actually see, does it align? Is it clear? Do people know why they're doing one thing that then feeds into the next and to the next? And then finally, we have our overall outcome. So you can see this from the networking course. There's a learning outcome. For the assessments, we use scenario-based learning, peer-reviewed activities. We had the simulation that you saw and the essay based around that. Learning activities, discussions, reflections, polls, and then the content with the articles, videos, and everything else. And that is how we were able to take this information, say, this does look good. We can move forward to the next one. And then I put it together inside of an activity that I call course mapping, where essentially this is kind of like lesson planning for all of you teachers out there, where I am physically mapping what we're going to be doing, but in this online sense. So every single little block, and yes, this was done in Excel, by the way. I do not do anything fancy because I'm going to be sharing it with my faculty members and my subject matter experts. And we all have Excel or Google Sheets. So that's what we use. And what you can see though, is that I'm dividing up what the students are going to be doing by page. So as they're going through everything for module 1, what they're going to be experiencing is the reading, a video, a practice question, another video, practice question, more videos, and a reflection. And then I plugged in the information that you saw from the past screen into here, and that's how I build everything out. Eventually, I copy all of this information, I put it into my learning management system, and that is going to be my finished product at the end of the day. Nothing too crazy, but doing this activity really does, once again, see how everything does align. And then, of course, if you need to go back and revise something, let's say you get feedback from students and saying that the practice question, the third practice question of week 1, didn't really hit home, you can go back to that practice question, go back to the drawing board and back to these blueprints and say like, oh, okay, it was this practice question in particular. How can I tweak this to be a bit more relevant and more engaging and make people overall just like it a bit better? And finally, folks, and I've already gone over time. I'm sorry, I talk a lot. Anyway, the final thing I want to be able to share with you is that as you're taking away this experience, just reflect on everything that you learned about today from backward design. It was a lot. We went through a ton of things. This is an entire model that people use every single day for their jobs. So I hope you were able to get something out of it. And overall, as you leave today, just think about what were your main takeaways from everything from our conversations, from our workshop. What did you learn about inside of your groups? And of course, how can you apply these concepts into what it is that you do, whether professional development, training, your own courses, or whatever it is. And most of all, write it down. Writing it down is absolutely going to make this stick a little bit more, and it's absolutely going to help you out on your instructional design journey. So now, folks, I will stick around for any and all questions, but if you made it all the way through until the end of this, just thank you so much once again for being here and for nerding out with us today.
I also want to jump into, on behalf of everyone, thank you, Luke, for your time and for sharing this valuable information. I also would like, because it's so much to mention, can you please talk about where we can find you and about the book that you've just written?
Oh, yes. I mean, if you Google my name, that's probably the easiest thing to do at this point in time. drlukehobson.com, though, is everything. The book, the podcast, the blog, the YouTube channel, my other courses on EduFlow and everything else. Everything is all inside of there.